This more in depth is the chair of the California Reparations Task Force, Dr. Kamilah Moore. Thank you for joining us here on Fox Soul's Black Report.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Indeed.
So, Dr. Moore, can you tell us about AB 3121 and just the role of the California Reparations Task Force?
Sure. So California Reparations Task Force is an official state board or commission that was signed into law via a statute called AB 3121. It was signed into law by Governor Gavin Newsom September 30th, 2020. And so as a legislative advisory board or commission, our role as a 9-member task force is not only to study potential reparation proposals for African Americans with a special consideration for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. Our role is actually to develop what reparation proposals might look like for the state legislature to turn into legislation, and then for Governor Gavin Newsom to turn into law. And so right now we're in the middle of the development stage. We've passed the study phase, and now as 9 members, we're discussing, debating, and even starting to determine what those final reparation proposals will be for our final report, which will be released, as you all said, July 1 of this year.
Yeah, a little history lesson here, as it's been noted in this argument or this discussion that California entered the Union as a non-slave state. So why do you think California would owe anything to Black folks?
Well, it's twofold. One, the task force disrupted the myth around the state of California's role in perpetuating slavery very early on in our work, in the beginning of the study phase. We invited experts to testify, in fact, that there were over 1,500 Black folks who were actually enslaved in the state of California. Not only that, the state of California enacted a fugitive slave law in the state of California in 1852, 2 short years after the state was founded. And so what that meant was, if you so happen to be free and Black in the state of California, after that fugitive slave law was enacted, which was actually much harsher than the federal fugitive slave law that existed at that same time, you could be rounded up and deported to be re-enslaved in the South, or in some instances enslaved on California soil. In our historic nearly 500-page report, we actually included the stories of Black people who were actually enslaved in the state of California and were deported to be re-enslaved in the South. But not only that, our nearly 500-page interim report not only talks about the state of California's role in perpetuating slavery, but we also focus on the badges and incidents of slavery that still linger on in this country and still negatively impact descendants of American slaves today. And that's actually how our report is organized. After the chapter on enslavement, the 12 remaining chapters describe those lingering badges and incidents of slavery that still impact us, from racial terror, political disenfranchisement, racism in the environment and infrastructure, the pathologizing of the Black family, control over creative, cultural, intellectual life. Our last chapter is on the wealth gap. These are all describing these 12 major areas of systemic discrimination that impact us, or those badges and incidents of slavery as we're characterizing them.
And thanks for sharing that. Can you talk a little bit more about what some of the harms done to Black folks in California that the task force is exploring specifically?
Yes. And so when we talk about, for instance, we are tasked with coming up with what potential compensation might look like for state-sanctioned atrocities. So we've actually worked with 5 economists and public policy experts who are helping the 9-member task force to come up with a potential compensation amount for, again, state-sanctioned atrocities where there's actual data and evidence to support a claim that the state of California specifically was responsible for these particular atrocities. So the experts we've been working with have identified 5 state-sanctioned atrocities: health harms, devaluation of Black businesses, mass incarceration and over-policing, housing discrimination, and unjust property takings. These are 5 state-sanctioned atrocities where there's data to support California's role in perpetuating, and we're working as a 9-member task force with these economists and public policy experts to identify a potential compensation amount for each of those 5 harms.
Yeah. So, we mentioned just a bit ago that this report should be done this summer, top of July. When it is complete, what are you hoping that some of these findings show in regards to just this entire argument or discussion, if you will?
Sure. Just as in our interim report, I hope that our final report strengthens the case for reparations, of course, not only on the state level, but primarily on the federal level as well. In our interim report, not only in each of those chapters where we describe the badges and incidents of slavery, there's a section that obviously clearly details California's role in perpetuating those badges and incidents. But in each chapter, there's also a federal section to clearly show the federal government's role in perpetuating these badges and incidents of slavery. And in the statute that created this task force, AB 3121, there's a provision in there that says when the state of California provides compensation, that does not abdicate the federal government's role and their responsibility. As a task force, we understand that reparations for descendants of American slaves is primarily the federal government's responsibility. That is the entity that has the budget, for instance, to close the racial wealth gap, which at this current rate would take over 228 years to close. And so we really hope to send that message. And in our last hearing that happened over the weekend, that's what we voted on. In our final report, there will be a recommendation to the state legislature to put pressure on the federal government for reparations on a federal level.
Dr. Moore, real quick in about 30 seconds, are there any black folks that are left out of this opportunity for reparations in California? There's a lot of us that migrated to California. My dad's from Ghana. My mom is from Florida. They migrated to California for work like a lot of black folks. There are some people out there that say that folks like me, should have no part in reparations in California. Who gets left out?
Well, really quickly, the lineage standard that we adopted, where you would be eligible if you are a descendant of someone who was enslaved or free and black in this country prior to 1900. So someone like you would be eligible because even though your mother migrated from Florida, presumably she is African American or a descendant of someone who was enslaved in America on American soil. So there's over 2.5 million black folks in California. 300,000 or so of black immigrant origin would be included under the current motion that the task force voted on. But that's not to say that all black folks, we all, deal with anti-blackness. But there's a certain way that we can advocate for policies around racial equity without conflating it with the sacred political project that is reparations for the institution of slavery and those lingering badges and incidents that primarily affect descendants of American slaves. And you see that with the wealth gap data in LA, for instance. African Americans who descend from slaves have an average wealth of $200 compared to $72,000 for African blacks of immigrant origin and over $110,000 for white Americans or Los Angelenos. So there's wealth disparities that still stick on descendants of American slaves that really need addressing.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Moore of California Reparations Task Force. Come back again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.